I'm John Batchelor. Good evening. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is here. There's trouble in Asia. Big trouble in Asia. Pay attention to this. This is not China manufacturing cheap goods so that the American consumer can enjoy Walmarts. This is China with a fleet and an army and aggression and a tyranny at the center of it, threatening all of its neighbors. And finally, the neighbors are pushing back. Gordon, a very good evening to you.
Good evening, John.
We welcome our colleague Walter Lohman of the Heritage Foundation, who's just returned from Asia. He traveled with his colleague and super, Jim DeMint, head of Heritage. They traveled to Japan and Korea.
And Hong Kong and Taiwan.
And Taiwan. All of the, we'd have to say, capitals being pushed by the Chinese aggression. In addition, Jim is here to comment on remarks made at a recent Shangri-La dialogue in Asia between the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Chinese Army, the Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe, and the Secretary of Defense of the United States, Chuck Hagel. Walter, a very good evening to you. Thank you for this. I go immediately after your tour of the region, everybody looking over their shoulder, what have the Chinese done now? At this meeting in which Mr. Hagel and Mr. Abe both made speeches about their concerns about China, all of a sudden, General Wang Guangzhong explodes. The quotes here are surprising. He accuses both Japan and the United States of, quote, provocative actions and challenges against China. He goes on to say that Mr. Hagel's speech, he singles out the United States. Mr. Hagel's speech was full of hegemony, full of words of threat and intimidation to create troubles and make provocations. Walter, if he was an 8-year-old, I would say he's whining. If he was 18, I would say he was squealing. He's not. He's a grown-up. What's he up to? Good evening to you, Walter.
Good evening. Well, I think he's obviously challenging the United States in a very public way at a public forum, directly challenging the Secretary of Defense. I mean, he's not a nobody. He's the Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the PLA. So, it's a pretty serious thing that unfolded there. I mean, he's challenging us in front of our allies and in front of all the nations in the region that we've been trying to reassure for the last many years.
It's very interesting that another Chinese general at the dialogue, General Zhu Chenghu, mocked the United States for having allies. It was almost as if he's saying the United States was so weak that it couldn't do anything without its friends. And yet you have a China which has very few allies anywhere, and certainly none in the region unless you count North Korea. So it seems that this is a China which seems to be lashing out. What is your sense of it, Walter?
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to construct a sort of bizarro world in which the forces that kept the peace in Asia for the last 70 years are somehow the bad guys or somehow holding China back. I mean, the United States, our forward deployed forces and our allies in the region is what's enabled China to develop the way it has. And I guess it's just gotten to the point now where they can't even acknowledge that much.
Walter, on your travels through Asia, you met Shinzo Abe, the Japanese Prime Minister. Mr. Abe, in Singapore, actually made a very significant speech when he talked about the new Japanese. And the new Japanese, he defined them, are Japanese who are now taking responsibility for the peace and security of the region. Now, if we go back 4 years ago, no Japanese leader would have ever said that. And you would have heard squeals from people in the region upon hearing words like that. But now, people in the region are actually quite comfortable with the Japanese talking in those terms. What's happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, China has happened in a big way, especially since 2009 or so. They've become so aggressive in pressing their claims, and everybody knows the backstory about the development of their military and their continued rise in the region, and all of that has everyone pretty freaked out. I think another thing that's happened is that the Japanese have very carefully cultivated the diplomatic lines to support this. Abe's been out to Southeast Asia. He's been to every country there, met with all the leaders in a very short time in office, and so he's built support and built comfort that actually plugs into comfort that Japan has, historically had in Southeast Asia since the 1970s, 1980s, where they really got heavily invested. So, the Japanese profile in Southeast Asia actually is not that bad, and for the Chinese to calculate otherwise, I think, is really a misjudgment on their part.
Walter, what's the mood in these capitals you travel to? The mood, are they concerned about an accident, or are people ready to pull the trigger? Are they close?
You know what I heard the most of is just worry about American leadership, to tell you the truth. They're worried that we're pulling back just at the time where they need us the most, and that's causing jitters throughout the region. I think that's what you see in a lot.
Oh, wait a minute! I want to press that, because if they're worried about we're pulling back, they don't need to worry about it. It's a fact. Okay, so now here we are. Does that make them more likely to shoot first? Does that make them more concerned about an accident of conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at the sort of long-term impact it could have. Let's say, imagine the worst-case scenario, the U.S. pulls out completely. We're not hopefully doing that, but just for sake of argument, the Japanese would have to do something. They're not going to surrender to the Chinese. And so what you see now, I think, is that on a very small scale, with them beginning to ramp up what they can in terms of defense sales and Coast Guard sales and training seamen and that sort of thing. That's what Abe was talking about in his speech, and they're starting that. So you're sort of on the lowest end of that scale right now, but the high end, without the United States, does involve serious potential for war.
What I thought was very interesting is now you have Japan's Abe and the new Prime Minister in India, Narendra Modi, seem to be very good friends. They've worked together in the past. Modi is going to visit Tokyo sometime this year, because Abe referred to that in his speech in Singapore. It seems like we might actually have a knitting together of both Tokyo and New Delhi, and that would be very significant, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think Modi's an interesting character. I think that's definitely where he is on sort of the geopolitics of the region. I think he does want to move closer to Japan, and they have this problem with the Chinese in their immediate neighborhood. To us it's geopolitics. Actually, to them it's their neighborhood. But he's also a very practical business type, and it's hard to know how that's going to come out in the end. He's been to China. He entertained Chinese delegations in Gujarat, and so I don't know. I don't want to put too much faith in it yet.
The Chinese believe that they're being surrounded by adversaries, that there's a NATO light organizing against them. It's a fact, Walter. I mean, let's not avoid the obvious. They are being surrounded. What are they going to do about it?
Well, I wish they were being surrounded. Actually, I think it's still possible for some of those countries to become weak links. I mean, the Vietnamese, they feel like they're right on the edge, that they're the most serious here, but you just never know. With the right moves from China, some of this could unravel. So I wish these guys were more,
the people of Lilliput handled Gulliver, okay? He's on the beach, you nail it, you tie him down, and then you transport him back to your capital city. He's still a giant, but all the little people handled him. The Philippines, Vietnam, India, South Korea, Japan, I can throw in Singapore and Australia.
Yeah.
The Lilliputians can handle the Chinese. The Chinese know this. Are they going to act first, or are they going to take it?
Yeah, I mean, I get the feeling that they don't really understand the ramifications of all they're doing. So I think they're just going to keep pushing like they are and see, we're just going to see where it ends up. I don't see them backing off. I don't see them backing off any of what they're doing. So,
Gordon, do you agree? Make our day. Is that the Chinese?
The Chinese political system is in distress, and it can't make the right decisions. So I agree with Walter. China cannot back off, and this will have enormous ramifications, as he points out.
Walter, that's a one-way street, right? We're on a one-way street to war.
Well, I mean, I hate to say it, but it does look like that. I mean, it's hard to see where the off-ramps are. The Chinese just aren't very cooperative at helping us find ways. And this administration, I mean, I think to a fault, actually, they've bent over backwards to try to find ways, and they just keep getting it thrown back at them.
Walter Lohman, he is the director of Asia Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation, just back from Asia, from all the capitals of our allies, with his boss, Jim DeMint. I'm John Batchelor with Gordon Chang.